Hello everyone, welcome to EduCrack and welcome to another session for VARC. My name is Shreya and today the session we'll be taking is about reading comprehensions and introductions. So before we start with the session, I would like to do a quick sound check and a quick video check. If Can you please confirm whether I am visible to you and if I am audible? Can somebody please confirm if I'm audible and visible so that we can start on with the session? Yes, good evening, good afternoon, Preksha, good afternoon, Vikram. Thank you so much. Welcome to the session. Let's talk about reading comprehensions today. So, when we talk about reading comprehensions, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? There are two components of this term, reading comprehension. One is reading and the other is comprehensions. We know for sure that when it comes to CAT, specifically for CAT, reading comprehensions or RCs from now on is one of the most important topics, right? How is it important? Earlier, there were around 34 questions in CAT VARC section. Out of these 34, we'd see good 24 questions to be RCs, right? So we see that majority of the questions in the reading comprehension sections is reading comprehension, right? So we would see somewhere around 5 passages, and in those 5 passages we see anything between either 6 to 3 questions. There would be the format of the reading comprehension section would either be a passage having 6 questions and then 3 questions, or we would have 4 passages having 5 questions and 1 passage having 4 questions, right? So either which way, we do get an idea that reading comprehensions or RCs have always been one of the most important part of CAT VARC section, and not just CAT VARC section. When we look at other exams, when we look at IIFT, right? When we look at IIFT, we do get an idea that there is a complete section on RCs. You have to clear the cutoff for it separately. When we look at SNAP, we have good RC questions. When we look at NMAT, we have good RC questions. When we look at XAT, we have some good quality difficult RCs coming over there. So the idea is that whatever exam you look at, if it is an English based exam, if there is English language section or verbal ability section in it, it is mandatory that you will have reading comprehensions in some or the other format, right? You can have it in varying degree of difficulty. There can be easy reading comprehensions, there can be difficult reading comprehensions, there can be moderate reading comprehensions. You can have it from different kinds of topics. There can be reading comprehensions based on technology, politics, history, editorials, anything. But reading comprehensions are always there. So why is it that reading comprehensions are so important? Why is it that reading comprehensions are so important for any of these exams? So let's have an idea. The answer to this question is majorly in the name itself. So one thing that they want to check is your reading. They want to check 2 things. They want to check your reading skills and they want to check your reading speed. And then the other thing is comprehension. When it comes to comprehension, they also want to check your speed of comprehension and they want to check your depth of comprehension. So we know what is reading, to be able to understand the letters, form coherent words and form coherent sentences, and the ability to express it. Now, the ability to comprehend what is written, or the ability to read what is written on the sheet. What do we mean by comprehension? Comprehension basically means the ability to understand something. When you're able to understand something, if you have read it, what do these words mean? Not just what do these words mean, but also what is, what are the undertones? What is the author trying to tell you? What is the main idea of the passage? What is the primary purpose behind the passage? So all of that information is kind of understood through the word comprehension. So keeping these 2 things in mind, let us have a look at what reading comprehensions or RCs in the various competitive exams that we're looking at, especially for MBA. What is it that they're made of? So today's session is more of a basic introduction to give you an idea about what reading comprehension is. So if there is somebody who does not know or who does not have any idea about what a reading comprehension is, this is a very good session for you. If you are already at an advanced stage of reading comprehension solving, then I would say that you can have a look at it. Definitely go along with this. You may be able to learn something new. This is majorly basics, so that you get an idea about how to approach it. See, what happens is, when we look at CAT as an exam, the level of reading comprehension that we have, they are pretty high, right? When I say they are pretty high, that basically means so when we look at reading comprehensions, there are two things that we have to keep in mind. First is speed of reading. What do you mean by speed of reading? Speed of reading means the speed at which not only are you able to read pretty fast, but also you are able to understand. So the speed that we are looking at is the ability to read speed and the ability to understand speed. All right. So even if you are able, sometimes the ability to reading, it differs from the ability to understanding. If I give you a paragraph, if I give you an article and I ask you to read it in 1 minute, just read it in 1 minute, you won't be able to. You'll miss some information, you'll skip over something, you will eliminate something, you may not understand, you may just go about reading the words. But that is not how we will read for reading comprehensions. Now, when we look at the RC section, we'll have a discussion over it in some time. Let's see what reading comprehension means. So reading comprehension basically means there are passages from various sources for reading, right? So it is majorly based on passage. What is passage? Passage is a collection of paragraphs from a source with a clear idea, right? Passages are basically collections of paragraphs from a source with a clear idea. That basically means these passages, they are not just randomly picked, they are always picked with some idea in the mind of the author or in the mind of the test setter. Once you have seen the passage, after the passage comes the questions based on your understanding of what you have read. So whatever you read in the passage, whatever you've read in the passage, you will be asked understanding. Right? And understanding what? Understanding a lot of things. There are question types that are based on. And reading comprehension is what separates an active reader from a passive reader. What is an active reader? An active reader is a person who makes up scoring more in reading comprehensions because they are already in a habit of reading. They are already getting information from everywhere. They are habitual of reading different kind of genres. And since they are habitual and since they already are reading, they would also be fast readers. They would read fast. So, and then we have passive readers, people who enjoy reading once in a while. Maybe they don't enjoy reading at all. If you give them an article, they'll read it. If you give them a book, they'll probably take a lot of time to read it. It is a task. For passive readers, reading is basically a task. So, active readers are what most of the B schools seek. The reason why a lot of B schools seek active readers is basically because what is the agenda of doing an MBA? Now, the entire gamut here is of what is the agenda of doing an MBA. You want to do an MBA to go ahead and get a good job, right? So when you go ahead and get a good job, that is, you move into the corporate or you get into your own business, whatever it is that you do, a lot of reading would be involved. You'd be asked to read reports, you'd be asked to read articles, you'd be asked to generate analysis, you'd understand annual reports, and so on and so forth. You'd be asked to keep yourself updated with the changes that is happening, that are happening in the world around you. So for all of that, you need to be able to read not information and then use that information in a way which is productive. So that is something only an active reader can do. Hello, Abhishek, how are you? Welcome to the session. So again, coming back to this, all of that, reading quickly, assimilating information, using and processing that information in a format which is productive, only an active reader will be able to do that. A passive reader may not be able to do that because they are probably not habituated to it. So if you're doing your MBA and you want to get into the managerial level, the managerial tier of an organization, you need to have the ability to read and comprehend data, right? And that is why B school tests, they test this skill of yours, because it is not something that can be developed immediately. When you'd go to do your MBA, you'd have a lot of text given to you, you'd have a lot of information given to you from which you may have to solve your questions, you may have to make graphs, understand graphs, and do a lot of things. So you need to understand that reading is something which is extremely, extremely important. Having said that, let's understand what is comprehension based on. Comprehension is based on the knowledge of what is understood. So what do you mean by understood after reading? This part here is what comprehension means. A little bit of prior knowledge, majorly because if you have an idea about that topic, you will be able to perform better. So the familiarity of a topic definitely helps. So for example, if I'm a science student and given a science topic, I would want to solve it, I would understand it better because I'm familiar with the terms and terminologies that are there. On the other hand, if I'm a commerce student and you give me a science topic, my familiarity with it would be a problem. So when I say I would have problem, it would basically mean that I would have problems comprehending the passage in a smooth manner. It would not be seamless, it would not be very smooth. So a little bit of prior knowledge helps. Now the next question that comes here is that if I am a science student, why would I go ahead and read commerce passages right now? How is it relevant for me? When we look at this is where we talk about increasing our scope of reading. Even if you are a science student or a commerce student, start increasing your genre, where you start incorporating different kinds of reading in your day-to-day lives. So for example, small little articles, even if you're a science student, it is okay to go ahead and read a blog on economics, or go ahead and read a blog. I'm not asking you to go and do a thesis on these topics, that is absolutely not relevant or not required. But it should not be so that when you go to take your exam and then you open up your passage and God, it is an economics passage and I am not comfortable with economics, then there is going to understand what do we mean by the context. When we look at the word context basically means surroundings, right? The meaning of the word context is surroundings. So again, it is a contextual meaning here. The context of the passage is dependent on the kind of tone that is being used, and the tone of the passage can be very broadly divided into positive, negative, and neutral, right? So we are looking at developing the context of a passage, we are looking at understanding the context of a passage, and we want to understand whether the passage is positive, negative, or neutral. All right. And how do we do that? We will be able to do that only when we have a sound understanding of what is happening. All right. We will be able to do that only when we know what positive words are, what negative words are, what neutral words are. So if you do not have a good vocabulary, you will not be able to do this. So comprehension is based on contextual meaning, and contextual meaning can be understood only on the basis of a good vocabulary. All right. So when we read something, it is based on the whatever you have read. It is based on your prior knowledge. It is based on the context and the contextual meaning of whatever you have read. Once you have a coherent understanding of these three things, you would be able to solve the passage better. Now, what exactly is a skilled reader and what will a skilled reader be able to do? If we understand this, not a very difficult thing to understand, but if we understand this, it will be we will be able to, or you will be able to mold yourself on the lines of these points. So a skilled reader will read faster. All right, they need to be able to read faster and comprehend faster and better. So what do you mean by comprehending better? Comprehending better means that not only are you able to understand the meaning of those words that are given, but you're also able to understand the deeper meaning behind a text. Right? You will be able to predict what is to follow next in the text. So prediction happens. And what is prediction? Prediction is something which only a very skilled reader will be able to do. How much is it relevant for how much is it relevant for CAT exam? Prediction is relevant for CAT exams because there are specific questions which are based on prediction. What comes next? Sometimes you get questions which say, what do you think the author will say next? Or what do you think the author will talk about next? So that is why prediction is something that can be done only if you are a skilled reader, right? So you have to read faster, you have to understand faster, you have to understand better, and you should be able to predict. So if you are not able to do that right now, this is the time where you develop that speed or where you develop that skill. If you're a skilled reader, you'd be able to understand sequences, you'd be able to understand structures, context, and characters, right? So when I say understand sequences, structures, context, and characters, that basically means, so what are sequences? In a passage, whenever a passage is written, the passage is written in a format where everything has a proper place. So first comes the introduction, then there would be the supporting argument, then there would be supporting examples, then there could be contradictory argument, and then there would be contradictory examples as well. So this is what a sequence and structure looks like. So what comes first? What are we going to write first? What comes next? What is more relevant in the discussion? All of that can be understood only if we understand the sequence and structure of the passage. And whenever a person does that, a person has the ability to do that, it is something which is going to help them immensely to solve the questions, because again, there are questions in CAT based on the sequencing and structuring. Then you should have the ability to understand the context. When I talk about context, again, I'm talking about positive, negative, and a neutral context, right? Then we should have the ability to understand characters. Sometimes some characters are key characters, sometimes some characters are not very important for the passage. How do we identify the key characters? How do we identify the characters which are not important for the passage? We will be able to do that only if we have the ability to identify what is important. And how do we develop that capability to identify what is important? We predict better, we comprehend better. If this better part happens, then all of these things will fall in place. You should be able to understand the central plot, the main idea, and primary purpose, and be able to differentiate between those. Central plot, main idea, and primary purpose, they sound very similar, but they are not. There is a massive difference. I won't say a massive difference. Massive is overstatement. There is a thin line, a fine line of difference between central plot, main idea, and primary purpose. And if you understand this thin line, you would understand why I said that there is a massive difference. Now, central plot is majorly, is a question type that you'd get majorly when you get narrative passages or descriptive passages or passages which are based on literature or stories, right? So central plot is something which is based on stories or somewhere, there is narration, there is some kind of information coming your way which is more personal. So plots, as how do we differentiate? Plot is based around is a point around which a story is based. So central plot will be more relevant towards stories or towards those passages which are based on narration or description or personal passages, right? Main idea is more towards analytical passages or argumentative passages, or where there's a theory given or where there are experiments given. So analysis, theories, experiments, social experiments, philosophy, they would have main ideas. So main idea basically means, again, it is the plot around which the passage is revolving, but it is slightly different from a plot. Plot is more relevant to story. So this is the main idea, the central idea, the key point that the author is trying to tell you. So main idea is more towards the analysis part, towards philosophy, towards psychology. Central plot is more towards stories and narrations and descriptions. Then what is the primary purpose? What do you mean by the primary purpose of a passage? Primary purpose of a passage basically means, why was this passage written? So to understand it this way, the author thinks up of a situation, thinks up of any situation, and then he decides that I need to answer this question. So for example, why is it raining in September? Right? And then the author goes into a research and he does his research and he finds whatever he wants to find, and then he writes an essay on it, that why is it raining in September, and then he gets to know that there's global warming and there are climatic changes happening, and then there are a lot of different things that are the reasons because of which it is raining very heavily in the northern part of the country in September, which is not very natural. So the main idea of the passage will be the answer to why is it raining. So let's say global warming is causing the unnatural raining. I'm not saying that global warming is, it's just a guess from my end. So global warming is causing the unnatural rains in September in the northern part of the country. That is the main idea. Alright. The main idea of a good passage is generally located in the first and second paragraph, and then the next paragraph they will have elaborations. Alright. There will be no central plot to it because this is not a story. The primary purpose of writing this passage was to answer the question that why is it raining so heavily in the northern part of the country. Alright. So when you have a question based on main idea and when you have a question based on primary purpose, the approach to these questions is completely different. That is one thing. And not only is that the approach to these questions is completely different, but also that the understanding needed to answer these questions is also totally different. So that is why this better part, again, the reinforcement to the comprehend better part comes. Somebody who will be able to comprehend better would be able to read between the lines and understand things like main idea and the primary purpose, and not just stick to the basic narration and the basic story. Okay. Having said that, let us understand how can we improve our reading, especially for reading comprehensions. Now, this is not a speed reading session. This is not where, how can you read, or I'm not going to teach you how to read. We are just going to discuss a couple of things which is needed to improve your reading for reading comprehension. All right. First of all, you need to develop a broader background. This is what I was talking about earlier as well. How do we develop a broader background? A broader background is developed when you incorporate materials from different sources in your reading. What are those materials? We will be talking about it in some time. I will give you a list of different sources and different topics that you can probably read from, the topics that have come in the passages earlier. Now, when I say that, it doesn't really mean that we are expecting that whatever we read or whatever kind of reading we'll do, you will get a passage from there, or it is not possible. There is no dearth of material in the world. There is infinite number of articles available, with more articles being churned out every day. So I really cannot say that this is where the articles are going to come from. That is one. But we can talk about a generic ballpark. We understand that every year almost we get one passage on technology, there'll be some passage on history, there'll be some passage on psychology or anthropology. So it is, it is like we know that this is the pond from which we are going to probably get passages. These are the topics from where we probably get passages. So let us stick to that. You really wouldn't get passages from engineering or medical passages, or you may, but it is very rare that they'll go ahead and give you a detailed description of the femur or the tibia or something. Rarely something like that happens. But the idea is that you can get a passage based on biology. You can get a passage based on pure sciences like chemistry or physics. It may not be very technical, you may not be needed to understand it technically, but you should still have the capacity to read it. So develop a broader background. Understand the structure of the passage article while you're reading. Whenever you start reading, and this is very, very important for anybody who's preparing for MBA, any of the entrance exams, if you are reading a passage with an agenda to either solve questions on it or with an agenda to improve your reading for reading comprehensions specifically, then this is something which is a must. I cannot emphasize more on this. You have to understand the structure of the passage. Every passage has a structure. So once you are done reading that passage, try to mind map your passage. What do you mean by mind mapping your passage? Mind mapping basically means, so let's say there is paragraph 1, there is paragraph 2, paragraph 3, paragraph 4. All right, there are 4 paragraphs given to you, and then you start labeling them. So you've read paragraph 1, in 2 to 3 words, write down what is it about. So let's say it is introduction to mangoes. I'm just making up a hypothetical paragraph here. I'm making up a hypothetical passage. So introduction to mangoes. Paragraph 2 talks about, let's say, medicinal uses of mangoes. So I am not writing the entire content here, but when you look at my mind mapping, you'd get an idea immediately about what could be the medicinal uses of mangoes. Paragraph 3 is about cultural uses of mangoes. Paragraph 4 is about commercial uses of mangoes. And then you can say paragraph 5 is about fruits in Indian commerce. Now, how are fruits important for Indian economy? Right. So what we have done is we have read a 5 paragraph passage, something to do about mangoes. All right. And then we have labeled each paragraph. We have mind mapped each paragraph. So there is introduction to mangoes in the first paragraph. Then there is medicinal uses of mangoes in the second paragraph, cultural importance of mangoes in the third paragraph, so on and so forth. So this would give you an idea about how do we mind map. And mind map is extremely important. Mind map is good for understanding the structure of the passage. So this has not only mind mapped your passage, but it also given a structure to it. Identify the type of reasoning. If any passage is based on reasoning or analysis or an experiment, or they are trying to prove a point, then there is going to be a reasoning behind it, right? You have to identify the type of reasoning that is there. All right. So how do we identify the type of reasoning? We need to have a sound understanding of the topic called critical reasoning, right? What is the premise? What is the conclusion? How do assumptions work? How do we strengthen an assumption? How do we weaken an assumption, or strengthen a conclusion and weaken a conclusion, so on and so forth. So if we have a good understanding of critical reasoning, then identifying the type of reasoning is also important. So whenever you start reading a passage which is based around reasoning of any sort, any kind, you should be able to identify what kind of reasoning is there, what is the logic that has been used to come from this point to the other point, and how do we utilize that logic, or how do we utilize that reasoning to answer the questions. then we should be able to anticipate and predict, especially for the prediction questions. It is extremely important. The prediction questions are also called continuation questions, right? The continuation questions are framed in the way where they ask you question like, how would the author continue the passage, or what would be the next thing that the author talks about, so on and so forth. So we should be able to anticipate and predict. So if you're reading a paragraph, or if you're reading a passage, once you have read the last paragraph, or so let's say you've picked up a big article of 10 paragraphs, all right, and you start reading, keep a target of reading till 6th paragraph, read till 6th paragraph very nicely, and then try to predict what will come in the 7th one, and see how good or bad your prediction is. Eventually over a period of time your predictions will start improving, right? Then try to study the organization of the passage, highlight, summarize, and review. If you have time, you can summarize the passage in your own words. When you're practicing or when you're reading for an improvement, then definitely that makes a lot of sense. All right. Sorry. However, in the main CAT, don't start summarizing because you won't have time for it. But right now we're talking about how do we improve our reading for reading comprehensions. So summarizing is something that is definitely going to help us a lot. And work on your vocabulary. As you read passages, you will come across words that are difficult, that you will not be able to understand, that you've never come before, or you're not able to put it in the correct context properly. If you have any such problems or any such difficulty, you should write that word down. You should be able to identify that word, write down its meaning, find out its root. There are a lot of things that you can do to work on the vocabulary part of it. All right. So it is extremely important to work on specific skills for reading comprehension. Now I can just ask you to go ahead and read 10 articles in a day. It is not going to help you unless you keep these things in mind, that when I'm reading even one article, even if you read one article in a day, do this exercise. Identify the structure of the passage, identify the type of reasoning in the passage, anticipate and predict what is going to come next in the 2nd or the 3rd paragraph or the 5th paragraph. Try to summarize the passage in your own words and identify the difficult words and work on those difficult words. So if you're able to do these 5 things seamlessly, your reading skills would definitely improve, and your scores in reading comprehensions will also improve, because when you start reading in CAT for reading comprehensions, you will automatically start doing these things. And when you have done these things, the answering part of the question become very easy, because this is what the questions are made of. All right, this is what the questions are made of. This is where the questions are going to come from. These are the skills, these are the things that they're going to test, whether you've understood the structure of the passage, or whether you've understood the reasoning, or whether you've understood the organization. Can you give a title to the passage? Have you understood the context? Can you tell the tone of the passage? What is the author trying to say? So on and so forth. All right. So moving ahead, let us talk about the different kinds of passages that are there. This is based majorly on the type of content, not on the topic. This is on the type of content. We have factual passages, or they are also called data-driven passages. So as the name suggests, factual passages, they have a lot of facts in it. There can be a lot of numbers, there can be graphs, there will be a lot of information. So factual passages may be longer, but definitely boring to read. Why boring? Because there is a lot of information, a lot of facts given there. And it is one of our inherent traits that we would want to mug that information up. We would want to retain those facts. So we will read it once, and then the moment we are done reading it, we'll be like, "Arey, mujhe kuch yaad nahi hai. I don't remember anything from whatever I've read." So what do? We go back. We start reading again, and we try to mug it up. It is not needed. Factual passages, they are long, they are boring, but they are one of the easiest passages to solve, because it is more facts. So if there are more facts, there are going to be less number of questions based on what is the author trying to say. So if the author says there are 5 apples on the tree and he took 3, that is all the author is trying to say, that there are 5 apples on the tree and he took 3. So this is the information that is given to you. Anything beyond that would be extrapolation or an inference. So factual questions, factual passages, they do not have a lot of complicated inference, questions on inferences or weakening or strengthening. So if the author says that there were 5 apples on the tree and he took 3, how can you strengthen this? I mean, there is nothing to strengthen here because it is just a fact. How can you weaken this? There is nothing to do here because it is just a fact. What is the tone of it? Plain, simple, informative, neutral. So it is not very difficult. It is not a very difficult passage, but it is definitely very boring to read. So it becomes challenging. And the other challenge that people face while solving factual passages is that you would want to mug it up. And I want to retain this information. It is of no use to retain this information. The next passage that we have is called a descriptive passage. The descriptive passages are those passages where a lot of description is given. It suggests in the name itself. Now, what do you mean by description? Description can be of a process, description of an experiment, description of a recipe, description of a place, description of a person, description of an event, description of how you're feeling, of an emotion, anything. But it is description, right? So there will be a lot of adjectives here, right? Descriptive passages will have a lot of adjectives. And if there are a lot of adjectives, then there will be a specific definite tone that they'll be looking at. So descriptive passages may have a tone-based question. Now, there are going to be descriptions. There can be positive descriptions, negative descriptions, so on and so forth. So very interesting to read. The flow is very smooth generally, very interesting to read, but they can be longer. The question types are not very difficult. The only difficult question type that people generally get from the descriptive passages are the tone-based questions. You need a lot of practice to be able to get the tone-based questions correct. But apart from that, descriptive passages are fairly simple to read and they are also very interesting. Alright, so then coming back to the narrative passages, when we look at narrative passages, they are all about narrations. What is narration? Narration basically means storytelling. So narrative passages will have some kind of a story and it is generally in first person. That is, I am telling you something. So for example, let's say I went to a mall, okay, and then I write a passage which says, this mall, let's say X mall, is very huge and there are 20 stores or 20,000 stores in it. It is one of the biggest mall in the country. And there is a food court and there are multi-levels where there are different brands and all of that. This is a descriptive passage where I am talking about description of a store, all right, or of a mall. A narrative passage would be, yesterday or today I went to a big mall and that big mall had 20,000 stores. I was very excited to see it because I could see a lot of different brands. So what is happening here? I am telling you how I felt when I went to that mall. Right? So it is a narration. It is a narrative passage. So narrative passages are generally first person. And they are easier because not a lot of complicated questions can be asked from narrations. So these 3 here, factual, descriptive and narrative, are the easier ones of the lot, and that is the reason why you may find 1 or 2 of these kinds in CAT. Out of the 5 passages, maybe 1 would be narrative or descriptive, something like that. But most of the passages in CAT, they are in this purview where they are either argumentative, analytical or abstract. Argumentative passages are based on opinions. These opinions may or may not be based on facts. These can be an author's personal opinions. So I feel that red is better than blue because I like the color red. Now what is the logic behind it? There probably may not be any logic behind it. There may not be any fact supporting it, that why red is better than blue, but I like it, so I'm going to ensure that everything I buy is blue. everything I buy is red, right? So this is what an argumentative passage looks like. So I like it, I will do it this way. Somebody asks the author why, because I like it. This is my opinion. These opinions may or may not be based on facts. So for example, I prefer apples to mangoes, right? I would rather buy an apple than buy a mango. And then somebody asks me why, so I may have a definite answer to it, that I like, I like the taste of apple better, I do not like the fibers in mango. Or it could just be like, just because I like it. So either which way, it is based on my opinion of the fruit. There may be a logic behind it, there may not be a logic behind it. And that is what makes these argumentative passages very complicated, because then the questions become complicated. Then the questions come on inferences, the questions come on whether you can identify what the author is trying to say, what the author probably means. Tones play a big role here in argumentative passage. Now again, if we look at the word argumentative, it seems as if there is an argument happening, or there is a fight happening, or there is a discord happening. It is not like that. Argumentative basically means something which is full of arguments. And arguments, especially in the VARC language, arguments means opinions, statements, and that's it. Arguments do not mean fights. So if you look at an argumentative passage, later on, if somebody says that this is an argumentative passage, don't try to look for a fight in that. It is not going to happen. Fine. Argumentative passages are not based on fights. Argumentative passages are based on opinions of the author. Opinions are also what is called arguments, not fights. Fine. So keep that in mind when you start solving an argumentative passage. Okay. Then we have the analytical passages. Now, analytical passages can be easy or can be difficult depending on A, how well have you read the passage, B, how comfortable are you with the analysis, and C, what is the thing being analyzed. So for example, if I am a science student and somebody analyzes the effects of global warming, I may be able to connect to that, right? I may understand the chemical reactions, I may understand the impact on the biology and the zoology and all of that. But if somebody starts talking about the economics or GDP and the HDI of a country, I may be at a loss. So if I get an analysis of the GDP's growth of the last 5 years, I will take more time to solve that passage than I will take the time of than me taking the time to solve a passage on global warming of the last 5 years. So analytical passages can be tricky that way. Also, it always will have fact-based opinions. Analysis is done on facts. What is analysis? The inferences that are drawn from the facts, right? Once I see a fact, what can be understood from there? So if I see that there has been progressively more rains in the last 5 years, 1990, so in 2018 there was 10 centimeter of rain, 2019 there was 15 centimeter of rain, 2020 there was 20 centimeter of rain, and 2021 there has been 40 centimeter of rain. We see that there is an upward graph. So then the scientists have analyzed it and then they have given some reason. So an analytical passage will always have facts, reasons, analysis, and opinions. Right. So since there are facts, reasons, analysis, and opinions, analytical passages can become easier to understand, may also become more difficult to understand. So which way an analytical passage will go for you, it fairly depends on how comfortable are you with that particular topic and what kind of language has been used. So for argumentative and analytical passages, the language used is difficult, more complicated, more technical. Especially for analytical, you'll see a lot of technical language being used. So it depends on how well versed are you with that subject, A, definitely, and B, are you able to understand the fact that when you are reading an analytical passage, you are not supposed to memorize it, or you're not supposed to go ahead and understand the analysis. Then we have the abstract passages. Abstract basically means here that there is no particular structure to it, so that makes an abstract passage the most difficult of all, because there is no structure to it. I mean, you wouldn't really know whether the author actually means by saying something like that, or is he trying to say something else. The language is twisted, on topics like happiness and sadness, or emotions, or a hypothetical experiment. Then finally, they'll connect it to some internal trait of a person. So, philosophy, emotions, theology, they are generally abstract in nature, where you don't really have anything concrete to show, but there are a lot of words, and the language is difficult, and the sentences are complicated. There can be longer sentences, there can be more difficult, complex sentences. So that makes abstract passages more difficult. You may get up to one abstract passage at least. Zat is very famous for giving abstract passages. Zat also used to give poetry passages earlier. They'd give you a poem. Sometimes you get it in CAT also. Very rare though. So that is completely on your luck. If you get a poetry passage or a poem as a passage, then you cannot really, I mean, a poem is fairly based on your inference, fairly based on your interpretation. If you're familiar with the poem and the interpretation behind it, fine. If you're not familiar with it, then you can attempt it whatever way you want, or you can choose not to attempt it also. But you should give it a try, is what I'd say. Let's look at the type of questions. And there's going to be a lot of information overload for you right now, because we have lesser time and a lot of information that I wanted to give you. But let us understand the different kinds of questions that are there. So we have factual questions. Factual questions are based on facts. They are easier to solve, definitely easier to solve. But it requires good reading. You should be able to locate that fact immediately, and then you'll be able to solve a factual question. So these are the easiest questions of all. Then we have structure-based questions. When we look at structure-based questions, there are three types. You can have something on the organization of the passage, where they ask you how the passage has been organized. For example, what is the role of second paragraph? What is the role of third paragraph? What is the relationship between the third paragraph and the first paragraph? What is the relationship between the second paragraph and the first paragraph? So for you to identify all of that, you need to know what role, or what is it that the first, second, third, fourth, fifth paragraphs are doing. Generally in CAT, you don't get beyond 7 paragraphs. 6 to 7 is when a longer passage is given. So it is not very difficult to identify the organization of the passage, what role. So is first paragraph an introduction? Sometimes they give you the conclusion first, then in the second paragraph they've given you an introduction. You can get something of that sort also. So organization of passage, how do you do that? You mind map. All right, then you can be asked the questions on title of the passage and tone of the passage. So how do we go about solving these question types? We will have separate sessions for it. Right now I'm just familiarizing you with the kind of questions that can be there. You can get questions on inference. Inference basically means something that can be understood. It may or may not be written, but it is understood. So then we have reasoning questions, where they ask you to strengthen a part of the passage. They may give you a sentence, a statement from the passage, and then they'll ask you to either strengthen it or weaken it. They can ask you what is the assumption behind that statement. They can ask you what is the flaw in the reasoning of that statement. Right? So this is all reasoning based. So if your concepts of critical reasoning are in place, if you know the difference between the different kinds of question types and how do we identify the assumptions and what are the strategies for understanding the conclusion and strengthening or weakening the conclusion, these question types, not very difficult, but it requires a lot of reading. You do get vocabulary questions, contrary to the popular belief where people say that there are no vocabulary questions in CAT. You can get vocabulary questions. You can get up to 2 to 3 vocabulary questions from the passages itself. Right? They can ask you the contextual. They ask you the contextual meaning of words. They'll give you options accordingly. They ask you continuation questions. So the part where I kept on repeating about that you should be able to anticipate and predict. This is where that anticipation and prediction part comes in. That is continuation. Now, there is a specific skill set required for it, the ability to eliminate options. This question type cannot be solved without the ability to eliminate options. And how do we do that? I'll tell you exactly how to do it when we come to that part where we talk about solving of these question types. Then you get questions on main idea and central theme, right? And then you have questions on primary purpose. So these are the major question types that you can get in CAT. Sometimes you get questions on graphs if there are graphs involved in the passage. You can get questions on analogies, right? Very rarely though, but you can. There may be an occasional different question type that comes in, very rarely though, because these are the most commonly found question types in CAT. All right. What do you need to read? Now let's come to the part where we talk about what do you need to read. You need to start reading different blogs, so personal blogs, travel blogs, educational blogs, and technological blogs. This will help you increase your scope of reading. It will familiarize you with different kinds of reading, different kinds of writing types, and how do we adapt to it immediately. Start reading articles which are content based. So what content I will share with you in a few minutes. Start reading newspapers, very important, not just the front page, but when we talk about newspapers, there are three things which are extremely important. One is definitely the front page, right? The second is the editorials, extremely important. And the third is the business page. So if you are able to read these three types confidently, then there is no problem. And also sports. Go through sports, because sometimes you may get a passage based on sports, very rarely though, but yes. So there are things that you should be focusing on in a newspaper. What newspapers to read? Start with the Times of India. Start with it. The language is good, grammatically correct, easy. Then move on to the Hindu, then the Guardian, New York Times, New Yorker. So these are the Indian newspapers that you would want to read. If you are keen, you can also read the Indian Express, right? These are the foreign newspapers that you may want to read. But Times of India, the Hindu, Indian Express, try to read an English newspaper is what I'm trying to say here. Do not read, if you want to read a newspaper in vernacular languages, do it for your own information, do it for your own, at your own leisure time, but not with an agenda to prepare for CAT. This is not for preparation of CAT. Vernacular newspapers are not for preparation of CAT. They are only for increasing our information. All right. If you want to improve your reading comprehension with an agenda to crack CAT, crack reading comprehensions, then this is what you'd be reading. Start reading some novels. Pick up a novel, set up a deadline for yourself. Read contemporary novels, some, autobiographies. Read some biography. Read some self-help books. Some fictions. Some non-fictions. Some older English books. Sometimes you may want to read some poetry as well, just to familiarize yourself with how poems are structured. But that is totally your wish. Then we have the editorials. Read the editorials every day. And the activity that I told you, where you may want to understand the structure, the central idea, the plot, and all of that, try to do that exercise with every editorial that you come across. Again, when we look at this page, we see that I've talked about articles which are content based. So what is the content that you need to start working on? Technology, psychology, philosophy, culture and anthropology, history, politics, law, economy and business, life sciences, fictions, autobiographies, non-fictions, and sports. Now, I do not want you to do a research paper or thesis on these. That is not really needed. When I say that you have to read on this, read at least 5 to 6 articles, not on a daily basis, like over a due period of time. you should have familiarized yourself with the content, or some content in technology, something in psychology, something in philosophy, at least 5 to 10 articles of on each of these. And where do we get these articles? You can get a lot of it online, right? We'll be helping you with some, we'll be posting some on the web page also. I'd be sharing links for the same also. So the idea is, when I say history, you can talk about Indian history, you can talk about global history, the world wars, the cold wars of the world, all of that. The French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Indian Revolution, the Milk Revolution, the Green Revolution, anything and everything can come, right? When we talk about anthropology, the Mayans, the Incans, the Harappa culture, the Indus Valley civilization, the Cholas, the Mughals, they can talk about anything, anything. So I'm not saying that you have to know, you have to be a know-it-all. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that if you're comfortable reading about all of this, if you've read at least 5 to 10 articles, simple blogs, you would be comfortable with the idea. And that is what is most important, to be able to develop that content, to be able to develop that comfort zone with content, to be able to develop that comfort with the words and the ideas. So these are the topics that you will have to necessarily read on, right? Necessarily read on. And you can start researching on them and reading. Sports, you can read from the newspapers itself. This is fine. But for rest of the other things, you need to have good content. And a lot of free content, a lot of content is available online. You can just, all you need to know is the right keywords. Fine. So having said that, reading comprehensions is not very difficult. It is not something that should scare you, that should be scaring you. But it is also something that should not be taken lightly. You need to have specific strategies in place. You need to have good reading skill in place. You need to have good comprehension skill in place. In the next upcoming sessions of reading comprehensions, we would specifically talk about each question type and how do we go about solving each question type with certain examples. All right, but for today's session, that is all from my side. Thank you so much. You can have a look at the description below and get an idea about the batches that we have to offer. If you are interested in a live batch, we have 2 batches running currently. You can get in touch with us. You can go on our website and explore it. There's a lot of free content available there. It would really help you a lot if you are somebody who's preparing for an exam right now. And not just MBA, not just CAT, but for a lot of other exams, we have a lot of free content and a lot of free videos and lectures which are available on the website. So I would ask you to definitely go and visit educrack.in and do have a look at the description below. It will give you a lot of idea about the batches that we have right now and how do you get into those batches, the schedules and everything. That's all from my side. Thank you so much. Have a good day.